Hello, I'm Jason Acuna, producer of the Speaking of Radio Hour, and I'm joined today by our interim news director, Regan McCarthy.
Hey, Jason. So, what are we speaking of today?
Today, we are speaking of tornadoes.
Yes, and we're taping this episode before our live studio audience just before the May 10th anniversary of the tornadoes that hit last year.
Many members of our community saw significant damage and are still struggling to recover.
I have to get my house mold checked. I have to get the walls repainted. They have to rip down my walls because of mold, probably. Water was pouring through my electrical.
We're going to hear from some of those people who are still rebuilding, take a trip to Railroad Square with Tom About Town, and learn from experts about how to be better prepared.
And we're doing it all live in front of our studio audience.
Ooh, can't wait to listen.
You are listening to Speaking Of by WFSU Public Media. Tornadoes can be traumatic experiences. One moment, a storm is blowing in just like any other Floridian day, and the next, your phone is going off with alerts, sirens are blaring, and it sounds like a freight train is outside your house. After a tornado, there is often widespread damage, but no one should have to pick up the pieces alone. Gina Jordan is hosting a discussion with stories from our live studio audience about the lasting effects and damage caused by the May 10th tornadoes.
Hi, I'm Gina Jordan, Morning Edition host here at WFSU Public Media, and today we are speaking of the Tallahassee tornadoes. It's been about a year since storms and tornadoes ripped through our community, leaving a deep scar in some parts, and Regan McCarthy takes us back to the days following those storms. Let's listen.
It came out of nowhere. First thing in the morning, people were laying in their beds, not prepared, and all of a sudden their roof is ripped off.
If we can get everybody out helping, we can recover, be more resilient for the next storms that hit us.
It was an emergency, and with the power out across Tallahassee and Leon County, we did what we had to do.
Those are the voices of Lauren Brand, Alistair Rowe, and Sharon Caraway. They talked with WFSU reporters last year as they worked to recover from the storms and offered help to others in the community. One area that got hit especially hard is the Mystic Woods condo complex off Pensacola Street. Lynn Hatter visited residents there in the days after the storm, while many were still trying to dig out from under downed trees and power lines.
Many of the units have trees through the roofs. On the day we visited, some residents were loading up U-Hauls with the remnants of their belongings. Standing outside of a building next to a semi-crushed car is Chris, who didn't give his last name.
With the storm, it totaled my car. So I'm just waiting for them to come pick it up, and then so they can assess the damages, and then go from there and figure out like a settlement, and so I can try to get another car.
He points across the parking lot to Building 1000, which has a large pine tree that's carved through the first floor of it.
Yeah, because some of the units, they have electricity and stuff on, but our unit is not going to get it because how bad it's been damaged.
Are you in this one?
Yeah, I stay in 1012.
Here at Mystic Woods, many people are renters, and some, like Keith Neely, don't have renter's insurance or anywhere to go.
I just paid my rent. I'm just trying to figure out, how they're going to assist us, We need some assistance here, trying to get somewhere to live, to rectify this stuff.
Today, residents at Mystic Woods say recovery is still a long way off. Catherine Helms owns one of the condo units. She says 5 trees fell on her home during the storm.
Now I'm here, it's a year later. I'm living with my aunt at her house and living in her bedroom, just a small little bedroom.
Helms says her home still isn't habitable, in part because of what she says are ongoing insurance issues. She says every condo owner at Mystic Woods is on the hook for thousands of dollars to repair damage to the exterior of the buildings. And then there's the inside.
I have to get my house mold checked. I have to get the walls repainted. They have to rip down my walls because of mold, probably. Water was pouring through my electrical. So it's pretty damaged.
The move means Helms has been forced to significantly reduce her small business that she used to run out of her home, making money tight as she stares down what looks to be a long road to recovery. It's a road she's not traveling alone, as many residents in Tallahassee say they're still experiencing impacts from last year's storm.
So Indian Head Acres community, that was very hard hit, and I'm joined now by 3 people who were in that community when this happened. We have Sarah O'Neill, Linda Marie Casa, and Gordon McGill. So an EF2 tornado tore through there, changed the look of the neighborhood, damaged trees, damaged structures. Were you all home when it hit?
Yes.
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 Did you have a sense that something was coming, or did you think it was a normal storm that was happening?
Well, we didn't have any warning. No radios on, no phone on, and it was about 6:45 in the morning, and we woke up. It was raining hard, and the wind was blowing harder and harder, and suddenly it was on us.
Yeah.
And it was like being in the midst of a whiteout snowstorm. You couldn't see anything.
Wow. Yeah. And so you two were in the same house when this happened, but I remember you telling me that your experience was different. What was your experience?
Well, I thought I was dreaming, it was, and we jumped out of bed, and right there, we have 5 windows in our bedroom and 27 windows in our whole house. But I looked out, and it was fascinating. I thought it was beautiful, but I thought, oh, this seems like a tsunami or something, Oh. And then I got really scared because I heard what I thought were gunshots, because the trees were snapping so quickly and the transformers were, I was traumatized by the sound, and then I realized, no, it's not, there's something else going on here. I mean, wind and water and trees were beautifully going horizontal.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It was like a dream. And so I just started to follow the tornado. I went to each window and around the house, and I followed it. And I kept saying, please stop, and it did.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, wow.
And then in the back of the house, there was this beautiful sight of a huge pine tree that I have always loved and everything, and it came down, cracked, but it stopped short of demolishing our storage unit, and it was held in the arms of a magnolia tree.
Oh my goodness.
And it was beautiful in this very dreamlike thing going on.
Weird dreamlike way.
Yeah, I became the tornado, or I followed it and asked it to please stop.
Yeah, yeah.
But it showed how trees take care of themselves.
Yeah, yeah.
In Indian Head.
Oh, right.
So-
Now, Sarah, you were renting a home at the time, and that home was essentially destroyed. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. And I did have a warning ahead of time. Actually, I had woken up, and I wasn't sure what time it was. I don't know why I was awake. I had just woken up. And I went to check my phone to see what time it was, and I had a text from my mom, who doesn't live in the neighborhood, but had heard about the tornado. And she texted me and my brother. My brother also lives in Indian Head.
Yeah.
And she texted us that there was a tornado and we needed to take shelter. And I literally responded, but I'm sleepy. And I just didn't take it seriously, because I've been in Tallahassee my whole life and never seen anything from a tornado, not damage that we saw,
Yeah.
or even in town, like so centrally in town. So I kind of continued to lay in bed, and then the alert went off on my phone and my partner's phone, warning about the tornado. And I still was just not really, for better or for worse, I was not taking it very seriously. And I opened the window in our bedroom, which is behind our heads, and was just kind of looking outside, and it was pretty calm out. And I remember hearing the birds, and all of a sudden I heard, some people describe tornadoes sounding like a train. And what I was hearing was like a low hum, very far away. I almost couldn't hear it. but I heard a low hum, and I was still feeling fine, and then I was listening closely, and it was getting louder and louder, and the wind started picking up, and that's when I jumped out of bed and was like, we got to get in the hallway.
Yeah. And you had a bunch of trees on the house.
Well, actually, it was just one huge pine tree. We had several trees down in the yard, but it was a massive, like, old-growth pine that came down on the living room, dining room, and part of the kitchen as well. It's basically half of the house, if not more than half of the house. Yeah.
Absolutely terrifying. So you had mentioned that you pretty much lost everything.
Yeah, well, in some ways we got really lucky, but so my partner and I, we play music, and we had that week we had brought out all of our music equipment into the living room because we were playing a lot of music and kind of just, hanging out in there. So we had, all of our music equipment in the living room, as well as, of course, couch, record player, records, books. And I had actually done I was just kind of like in a cleaning mode, and I had done a huge load, like multiple loads of laundry of my clothing. So pretty much everything that I own and wear usually I had folded on the dining room table the evening before, and I was tired, and I was like, oh, just put it away in the morning. So all of my clothes, I really didn't have many clothes, were in there, as well as shoes. We have a shoe rack at the front, so all of my shoes minus this old ratty pair of water boots, like rain boots that I had in the closet. So yeah, it was mostly all of my things were in there. My computer, my work phone, my instruments, the things that matter.
Yeah. And so were you all able to stay in your home?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were lucky. We didn't have enormous damage. We had a tree on one end of the house, but that was easily repairable. But going outside was a shock, because we've been in Indian Head for about 6 years, and we've seen some hurricane damage, including from Michael. But I had never seen damage and tree fall like that day on May 10th, when you didn't recognize anybody's home or the streets.
Yeah. Yeah, driving past there, it is, there's no question something significant happened right there.
Yeah.
And Sarah, you obviously had to get out of that home. Tell us about your housing situation since then.
So first we stayed with my aunt and cousin for maybe a week and a half. And mind you, we have no access to everything in the house. We can't get in there. Actually, my partner had tried to go into the living room to grab my guitar, which was very sweet. And a piece of the sheetrock from the roof fell on his foot, and we thought his foot was broken, and so we were really stranded in the house in that moment. But once we were able to get out of the neighborhood, which took hours to get out, we went to the hospital, and then we stayed with my aunt and cousin for maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks, and then we stayed with a friend who lives in the neighborhood. She hosted us for a couple of weeks, and that was wonderful, such support in that way, but also challenging to not really have a space that's your own, And then we were able to get a short-term rental, a 6-month rental, because we were thinking the house would be fixed by the end of that 6 months, and it is still, I think it still has not been put on the rental market. There's still, it's been fixed, but they're still needing to do cleaning and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So, a year later.
Yeah. So Gordon and Linda Marie, you were able to stay put, and I know that you hung out with some neighbors. You got together and made the best of what you could. You had a cookout that night.
Yeah, power was out throughout the whole neighborhood. There was no power. So one of our friends in Indian Head had brought down a big grill to Optimist Park, that evening, and the word went out that everybody should take their whatever food they wanted to share out of their refrigerators because there was no power; it was going to spoil. Bring it down to Optimus Park, and we'd have a neighborhood grill, which we did, and it was great.
Yeah.
There were about 50 people there,
Uh-huh.
and everybody shared what they had.
Fantastic. And Sarah, you had to get some help. You mentioned that you sought some help from the Red Cross.
Yes, the Red Cross set up at Optimus Park. It's hard for me to remember the timeline. Everything was really overwhelming during that time, but I think it was in the first week after it happened. And so we went down to Optimus Park, and they essentially had us fill out like a survey, and like immediately based on our responses gave us a $500 like debit card essentially, to you know, with some guidelines on what they'd want us to use it for, as far as replacing things.
Yeah.
So we got help that way, and then we also got FEMA help. That took a bit of time. I mean, I guess in the big picture, we got financial help pretty quickly, but when you've lost everything, you really do need help right there, right then, in that moment.
Yeah.
So I'm appreciative of the help. It was just really hard until we were able to get FEMA support. It maybe took about 2 months to get support from FEMA, and they came out and surveyed the house twice prior to sending the aid.
Yeah. If you had to do it again, would you get renter's insurance?
Yes. Well, what's funny is our lease stipulated that we had to have renter's insurance, but because the person renting to us was a friend, they knew that we were just needed a month or two to recover, and we had just looked at renter's insurance like truly 4 days before this happened, and we were like, oh, we'll sign up, like, you know, just totally did not, So yes,
Yeah.
the answer
Yeah.
is yes.
Yeah. We never think it's going to happen, and those tornadoes were just shocking. They were just unprecedented. So what would you say, and I'll ask this of all of you, what was the most difficult for you in the days after? What has been the most difficult for you since then?
Well, I think in our case, it was just cleaning up the mess so we could operate around the house. And I have to say there was an incredible response from the city utilities, from tree crews that came in quickly, almost overnight, from as far away as Georgia and North Carolina. There were organizations, there were some Christian organizations there, like Good Samaritans, that were volunteering, but to just get the neighborhood operable so you could move through the streets without going over power lines and fallen trees took about 2 weeks. Yeah. We were lucky. I had my little Coleman stove. We cooked. I made Linda Marie some short ribs on the Coleman stove for Mother's Day dinner.
Oh, nice.
And we made do. We were out of power for about 8 days, and then we got internet back in about 20 days. But it took an enormous amount of coordination and volunteerism to do it.
Yeah. Sarah, what about you? What's been the hardest part?
Yeah, I think initially in the aftermath, I mean, there were so many hard parts, it's hard to narrow it down, but I think that because we were fully displaced from the neighborhood, a lot of the supports and groups that were forming in the neighborhood, like, you know, the barbecue you had in the park, you know, we weren't there. And so it was hard to not participate in and be part of community who were also experiencing the same things we were. That was really hard. And and then I think, you know, a year later, I think what's hard is that I still have really extreme reactions to weather. Like, I mean, definitely dealing with PTSD. When the wind blows, I get nervous. When I hear about severe weather, anytime there's any mention of a tornado possibility, I'm in the bathroom.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah,
with the door
that's
closed.
understandable. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Linda Marie and Gordon, you organized something in October. It was like a trauma recovery situation, and you've also both written poems to help you.
Right.
So I'd like to ask you to tell us about the neighborhood gathering that you organized for the trauma recovery first.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it started with the idea of what do I do now? You know, the thing that bothered me the most was losing trees. I love them. And we had to have 4 more trees removed. But I was so impressed with the tree guys who came in. They were so gentle, so I've written a poem about them as on the healer's journey. But when they took away this tree, it had smashed my favorite clay pot. And I just sat there and bawled my head off. And so I gathered up, and Gordon helped me do it, gathered up all these, I think it was in like 50 pieces.
Oh, a lot of fragments.
Yeah.
Maybe 100.
And I decided, I'm going to put this thing back together again.
And you did.
I did. It took me 5 weeks. And I put a candle inside it. And then we decided we wanted to have this vigil and would invite everybody to bring their own candle. And we had a trauma therapist come and talk with us. And we told stories. And we comforted each other, but we each had our little candle.
That's nice.
So that's the poem that I've written about. And I call them the green men
Oh,
who
yeah?
came in. They were
Can
beautiful.
Can you read that poem for us?
Yes. The title of it is Mending a Clay Pot, Cracked, Touched by a Tornado Tree. That's how the light gets out. The healer's journey began when green men with machines gently removed fallen trees, and a whole village of living vessels gathered together to restore and mend. Open hands listening to hearth pathway, radiating visionary hope toward renewal, retrieval, for we too are made of clay.
That's beautiful. Very
you.
nice. And Gordon, you wrote a poem. We're almost out of time, but I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about that, because that was really you sort of reliving the terror that you felt at that time. Maybe give us a little chunk of that poem.
Right, okay. Dawn, thunderclap, booms, cannon loud, trees stir uneasily, pale early light dims to dark, electric crackling of lightning, glowing blue within the gloom, a growing, rushing river of wind, rain darts horizontally in silver arrows. We leap from bed to window in alarm. Instantly it is upon us on every side, enfolded within the banshee wings of an angel of death, we scream in terror.
Wow, I think that's a pretty good summation of what some people went through that day.
Yeah.
I appreciate all of you for being here. Thank you. Sarah O'Neill, Linda Marie Casa, and Gordon McGill, thank you very much for sharing your stories. We appreciate you.
Thank
you.
Yeah.
You can hear these conversations on Speaking Of, the podcast version, available on all platforms. Up next, The Warehouse, a Speaking Of show by WFSU. This week, Tom About Town. Railroad Square has been a center for the Tallahassee arts community for years, but following the May 10th tornadoes, many of the small businesses in the square saw substantial damage affecting their ability to operate. 1 full year later, and the impact of the tornadoes is still apparent. which has some concern for the future of Tallahassee's art scene. Tom Flanigan is not only about town, but also here with our live studio audience, talking with members of the arts community.
What a thrill this is to be part of our inaugural, and we hope not the final, speaking of before a live studio audience. And I'm Tom Flanigan. Since my segment is entitled Tom About Town, I knew we were going to do this in studio part of the show, so I needed to get out into town, as the title goes. And so about a month ago, with a WFSU public media camera crew, we went running through Railroad Square in search of tenants and art folks there to get an idea of how the tornadoes of 1 year ago had impacted their lives, their business, and the creative process. And here is what we found out. And we are coming to you from Railroad Square, which is the artistic district of South Tallahassee. We are commemorating the May 10th anniversary, first anniversary of the triple tornado that struck this end of town and caused so much havoc and devastation. And I'm standing at the other vintage shop in Railroad Square. Co-owner Brooklyn Corey is with me. And Brooklyn, what do you remember most significantly about May 10th a year ago?
It was pretty devastating waking up and not knowing what's going on because we weren't allowed to come down here because of the destruction, but then learning like half of the square is just gone was pretty bad. Pretty sad time.
Yeah, how did you hear about the devastation? Was it just a phone call? Did you get a text? How did that happen?
It was either on Facebook or a text from another business owner that the whole thing was closed down by the city. So we weren't able to look at cameras because the power was out. So we kind of just waited a couple days to find out what the status of our building was.
And what was that status when you came down here, possibly expecting the worst?
Yeah, we were worried, but our building actually pretty much went fine. We had our power ripped out of the wall, like the intake, but other than that, we didn't have any damage. Thankfully us.
Well, a lot of folks, as you mentioned, here in Railroad Square did have a lot of damage. So what has the recovery process been like for them? And have we lost anyone out of the square? And what is this particular First Friday like here as you anticipate people coming, as many as before, or what?
It's definitely decreased the amount of people coming in because, like I said, we're about half of the vendors have left the square. I think 2 huge buildings had to be completely destroyed or like taken down. But yeah, it's definitely been a slow process getting everything back together and getting people back into the buildings that are still usable. But we still have a lot of people coming down for First Friday, so hopefully it'll start building back up.
At Railroad Square, we're at the Able Artists Gallery, and there we ran into a longtime denizen of Railroad Square, and that is Jim Russell of Jim Russell Art. And Jim, I know your place took a real hit from the tornadoes of May 10th. How did you find out about it? How did you hear it?
Well, the residents and vendors out here at Railroad Square often talk to each other on social media. They got a page where they share information. Of course, we're on email lists and that sort of thing. So that morning when the tornadoes hit, the news was going out quite fast that something really bad had happened out here at Railroad Square, and there was a lot of devastation. And basically, if you have stuff out here, you need to get out here.
You came back to Railroad Square when the all clear was finally sounded to find what?
Well, devastation, really. It was a lot of it. I was very lucky that I had a studio out here that I had closed down and moved into other galleries about a year before, but my stuff was in these other galleries as well. So, of course, my first thought was, do I have any art left, or is it all over Tallahassee now? But coming out here was really a shock, though, too, because there was just so much grief about this little, like, as you say, an enclave of art that was just ripped apart by these tornadoes. And so it was really an overwhelming feeling to arrive here and see that had happened.
What kind of impact did that have on your business? Because that is your livelihood now.
Yeah. For me, a lot of my stuff I sell online, so I knew I was going to survive as a business with that, but a lot of people don't do that. They have a lot of stuff just in the galleries. And so there were a lot of businesses that were able to stick around afterwards, but some didn't make it either. And that's really the sad part about it, is there were some businesses that just did not survive that. And you got to remember also that we weren't too far from coming out of COVID as well.
Railroad Square's Able Artist Gallery was co-founded by Lauren Walker, and she's here with us right now to recall what happened back on May 10th when the tornadoes came slamming through this part of town. Lauren, I remember the Able Artist Gallery was not originally here on this part of Railroad Square. Where were you guys?
We were on the other side, in a big warehouse that was turquoise and purple.
I remember it well, and that took a massive hit from the storm, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. It blew the whole back half apart, and it broke off, and then it fell down on itself.
Well, you are located here right next to another artist well known here in Railroad Square, Jan Cosmo, who also is very much into Caribbean music and tours the Caribbean basin and all that with her bands periodically. And she told me that she kind of approached you guys and said, hey, I think I can help you relocate. What was that like?
It was pretty awesome. It's a good opportunity. We have people that come up to us and offer us opportunities, and this is how we get to where we are today. It's a community. We can't do it by ourselves.
As soon as I got over the shock of the house being destroyed and driving in easily a half a mile before I got to Railroad Square, I was seeing Railroad Square on the side of the road. There were studios that had blown 3/4 of a mile away, and I was passing them as I was driving there. You know, there are unique colors in Railroad Square, and those were the things I was seeing. So I drove in, and I noticed entire buildings were gone. Other buildings were gone from the roof and half of the walls gone. And it was utter devastation. Now, my particular studio, it's in the middle of an 8-studio row called the Boardwalk. The Boardwalk. It's the only building in Railroad Square that was fully insured. So it was the first one to get fixed. Now, first one to get fixed means 2.5 months. I went in and went right into my studio, and there was water on the floor. The roof had lifted up about 7 inches, and water came pouring in from that. But we didn't lose a single piece of equipment, because all our electronic flashes and stuff were about 1.5 inches up off the ground because of the wheels. Pictures. I have 150 pictures on the wall, and 80 of them were laying face down in the water. Now, they are canvas prints, and they've been sprayed, so I took them and shook them off and wiped them, and they were, for the most part, fine. We lost 20 pictures out of 150.
And that last gentleman we were talking with is the esteemed and celebrated photographer Bob O'Leary, who has his studio in Railroad Square. We were not in Railroad Square speaking with him because he's such a busy guy. We had to literally track him down at the recent Word of South Festival, where he was also doing some work. That brings us back here to the WFSU Public Media Studios, and we are joined live by two terrific folks. First, Kathleen Spihar, Executive Director, Council on Culture and Arts, and Gabrielle Simpson, Vice President and Director of 621 Gallery, which is in Railroad Square. Starting with you, Gabrielle, what was the status for you and the gallery during the tornadoes of the 10th of May?
Yeah, so I wasn't in Tallahassee. I was with my mom at an appointment that day, and I got a text from my boyfriend who works here, and he was saying, I'm on my way to the gallery, I'm going to make sure everything's fine. And I'm just thinking, I don't know what you're talking about. What do you mean you're on your way to the gallery? You have work. And then I hear from Josh and I hear from our board members, and everyone's on their way to see what's going on with the gallery. And luckily, they were able to get in and see that our section of the building was okay. The outer wall of 650, the building that we're located in, was blown off for the most part, the wall that is for Cosmic Cat Comics. And we had a bit of debris that fell into our section in our main gallery, but thank goodness all of the art was okay. We were able to get reopened within the next month when they got all of the debris cleared up, but very, very thankful that the damage did not extend too far into the main galleries of 621.
Well, 621 back up, essentially running as before, and I think you have some big deals that are coming up here in the not too distant future, right?
Yes, we have continued with our monthly exhibition exchanges. We have continued to host a variety of space rentals and pop-up events for the community. Thankfully, our community has stuck by our side. Our engagement with the students has grown, as even this past month we had a fashion release with Stitch FSU. We had Kudzu Review do their magazine, literary magazine, launch with us. We've had 3 or 4 films that were shot in the gallery in the past year, including a documentary from some film students at FSU about the devastation of the tornadoes. And right now we've got a wonderful exhibition with Paula Santos and the inmates from the Madison's Department of Corrections. It's a wonderful exhibit that we're having a talk about on this upcoming Saturday, May 10th, which is the anniversary. We've also been planning a 1-year event for the tenants with Cap City Video Lounge and the V Arcade. Due to the rain on Saturday, we are going to be having our talk, and the V Arcade is going to be having a show that night, but we are going to reschedule the rest of the events that we had planned. But all funds raised are going to go towards the galleries that were displaced or affected by the tornado, such as Feeling Art, Able Artist Gallery, and 621.
Oh, that's terrific. Appreciate the beneficence right there. Kathleen, Coca was not hit directly, but you guys jumped right in to help with the recovery effort for the artists who were affected by the tornadoes, right?
Absolutely. We were on site about 2 hours afterwards, and so some of the debris that Bob had described was everywhere. We took a walk around, and Mickey Faust Theater, the roof was completely torn off of that. And then we saw also other particular buildings that were destroyed or really heavily damaged. We also witnessed an incredible show of community support. People were there walking around, hugging each other. They were bringing food to each other, water, anything that could possibly happen. So I talked to The Vault, which was a small music studio. All those musicians were completely devastated by what had happened there, but we guaranteed that we were going to help. So we jumped in several ways, just connecting with every organization and every artist we could possibly find to find out where they were at and what kind of help that they needed. A lot of them were coming down, and we could actually talk to them personally and find that out. There were some folks that needed immediate help. We are, right now, we're co-working out of Domi Station, and so Domi and Coca worked out an arrangement so artists could come to Domi and use that space as needed. We also then started to work with the disaster relief efforts that were going on in the county. So we worked with a Career Source Capital Region, Florida Commerce, and others to prepare for disaster relief that we knew that was going to come to the community through different means like FEMA. I don't know if anyone's aware of this or not, but usually arts and culture is not included in disaster relief. You have to actually add artists, any kind of creative businesses to the lists. So we worked very diligently to make sure that artists and arts organizations were counted.
So without the advocacy and the actually the leadership of COCA, this recovery process would have been a heck of a lot more challenging and difficult.
Possibly, exactly. What we found is that there were different needs. Some were extreme needs because it was in Railroad Square, but it also happened in Cascades Park with Southern Shakespeare. Their set for their Shakespeare in the Park was completely destroyed. Lemoyne didn't have power for a while. We're just kind of checking in. So at the different levels of need, then we would just come in and say, what did you need? And how can we find you some resources? We also had a local art supporter, Will Crowley, started a GoFundMe for Railroad Square, and eventually gave out over $700 per organization or per business from his fundraising campaign. He raised over $25,000 to do that. So we also helped out with the distribution of those funds and helped Will out with that effort.
It sounds, Gabrielle, like an entire community-wide effort to try to get things back up and running.
It really is. It really brought a lot of the tenants together, those who maybe didn't know who their neighbors were yet. It really kind of brought us all together for the same goals, and making sure that we're all there for each other and seeing what we can do to ensure that people don't forget about us.
When disaster strikes, it's sometimes difficult to remind ourselves that the arts and creative folks are every bit as vulnerable to this kind of situation as everyone else. So Gabrielle Simpson, the Vice President and Director of 621 Gallery, Kathleen Spihar, the Executive Director of Council on Culture and the Arts. Thanks for being on our inaugural Live Speaking Up.
Thank you. Thank you.
You can hear these conversations on our podcast, The Warehouse, available on all platforms. Up next, Unbothered, a Speaking of show by WFSU. Tornadoes can be scary, abrupt, and unpredictable. So how can you be best equipped when that alert hits your phone or it breaks into your favorite radio program? Lynn Hatter and Rheannah Winter are sitting down with experts to learn more about tornado preparedness.
It's been 363 days since a round of tornadoes touched down in our region of Florida. It gave us a glimpse of what 100-mile-per-hour winds can do in a place like Tallahassee. This week on Unbothered, we're talking about last year's natural disasters in preparation for the next one. I'm your host, Rheannah Winter. Joining us is Kevin Peters. He's the Director of Emergency Management at the Leon County Division of Emergency Management. We're also joined by the Director of Community Relations and Resilience in Leon County, Matthew Cavell. And sitting across from me is WFSU's Director of Content, Lynn Hatter.
Hey, Rheannah.
Hi, Lynn.
How you doing?
Good. I hear you have a story about tornadoes to tell us.
Oh, man. It's the most embarrassing day of my life. So what happened was I was filling in for Gina on Morning Edition. So my day started around 3:45 a.m. It was very dark. And I get to the station, all's going normal. But around 6 a.m., the emergency weather alerts start going off. And I'm like, this is odd, because we have newscasts at 6:04, 6:34. You guys know how these go. And every single time I tried to start a newscast, I would get maybe 10, 20 seconds in, and an EAS alert would go off. And so around 7:01, once that last one went off, I said, okay, what is going on? So I go to the National Weather Service and I pull up our map, and our entire area is just red. And I'm like, this doesn't look right. And I remembered that that storm was supposed to pass over us. So I called down to our meteorologist and I said, hey, meteorologist, this don't look good. And they're like, what do you mean? You guys are fine. And I'm like, I think you need to refresh. And I remember when our meteorologist refreshed, she was like, ooh, you need to run. So just so everybody understands the layout here, our radio studios are on one side of the building and where we are, we're on another side of the building. So I ran across the building, and the front doors opened, and I remember I looked up, and the sky was swirling in this sickly green-gray color. And I have been through a lot, but I don't think I have quite ever been that afraid in my life. So I hauled tail feathers downstairs, and I ran into a downstairs conference room that is apparently, our general manager said, the absolute worst place for me to have hidden. And I cowered, starting from about 7:05 until I thought that maybe the storm had passed. So if you were listening that morning and you were wondering, what's going on? Your Morning Edition host was cowering in fear for her life. That is where she was. I was downstairs, and I was hiding. And I guess that leads me to the question that I have for you guys, Kevin and Matt. Did I cower in fear properly?
Well, I will say, and then Kevin can talk about the proper cowering technique, but I will say that you followed precisely what folks do when they receive alerts, that you receive one, maybe two alerts, different sources, you vetted it, and then you took action. And the biggest thing that we can always say, is that no one has been communicated with too much during a disaster. And we always encourage everyone to have multiple ways, weather radios, push alerts, whatever it is, to come to your phone to give you that nudge to take that appropriate protective action as soon as possible. Now, what that protective action is, Kevin?
Yeah, so, you did do some of the right things. You know, we generally advise people, if you're in a building, to get to the lowest level of that building. Now, you need to be in an interior space away from all the exterior walls and windows. So the lobby here of WFSU Studios, not the best place, a lot of windows there. You were heading in the right direction, perhaps maybe one of the bathrooms or something more closer to the interior or the stairwell of the building. Might have actually been a little bit better of a spot, but you, as Matt said, you did the right things. You received the warning and you took action.
Okay, so I was in the vicinity of safety. Yes. Maybe not quite right on the money, but I was close enough.
Yeah.
I'll add that we're taking audience questions here, and one of the questions was related to those alerts, because Lynn heeded the alerts, but I think the first step that you're mentioning is actually getting those alerts and listening to them. So what challenges does local government face when it comes to actually getting people to heed the threat of a natural disaster?
Well, I think we'd start with first receiving those alerts. Now, there are options on the phone to turn off alerts that would come to you. So, normally we issue wireless emergency alerts in coordination with the National Weather Service for what protective actions you need to take and why and when and locations and all that other stuff. Those that come to your phone, though, you have the option to turn off. We would never encourage you to do that. Those types of alerts that you receive, if they happen at inconvenient times, like when you're sleeping and they wake you up, guess what? That was for an intended purpose. And so we would always encourage folks to keep themselves available to receive those alerts. That is one of the hardest things that we can do to make sure that we reach you where you are as fast as possible, because when minutes matter in a tornado warning, you need to make the right and best choice, or close enough, as Lynn did.
How do you think the impact of the tornadoes we saw last year on May 10th compares to something we're more familiar with, which is hurricanes?
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, Lynn.
No, I was just saying it's right around the corner.
Right. Yeah. So while the tornadoes had a much narrower impact in our community, like the path was mile wide ish. So there was still a lot of community that was not affected. Mm-hmm. The numbers were more than Hermine, Irma, and Michael combined with damaged structures. We had over 1,600 homes that had damage. Mm-hmm. 174 of those were considered destroyed by the FEMA damage assessment process. So it was by far the most impactful to the homes in our community beyond anything we've seen with hurricanes, multiple hurricanes.
Yeah, I think it's worth mentioning that the winds from these tornadoes were reaching up to 100 miles per hour, and while we haven't, at least recently, been hit by a Category 4 tornado directly with the eye wall in our region, I think we might have seen what that might look like if and when that happens.
Certainly. I think the takeaway for the community is the tornado activity we had on May 10th of last year is a glimpse of what a strong hurricane could look like. But I do want to point out, though, with hurricanes, it is very, very important to know water is probably the most deadly hazard we've seen. It's that storm surge, that rise above the coast, above ground level, as storms come in off the Gulf of Mexico. That's one of the most deadliest parts of hurricanes. So people in the Big Bend area, if you're in a coastal community, you certainly need to pay close attention to that. Second to that, freshwater flooding from heavy rainfall. And then wind is actually on the lower end of the impacts that actually take lives in hurricanes.
What can we do to mitigate damage? And if either of you could answer this in terms of rural versus people in the metropolitan area, because I know there's a big difference with our tree canopy and everything. So what can be done to mitigate some of the damage done to life and property?
Well, and I'll use a personal example. I do live in the city. One of the things that I've over the last 10 years is I've worked to get trees taken down that are very close to my home, that I've had somebody come out and check the health of the trees, and unfortunately a number of the trees weren't healthy and needed to be taken down. But a lot of preparedness actions, they are costly and it takes in a few years, but it's just an example to people in the community that if you work at it over time, you can achieve your preparedness goals. You don't have to do it all in one day.
So what goes on for you guys in both of your offices when a natural disaster is imminent? Because I think for the tornadoes on May 10th, a lot of people, it came out of nowhere for them, but I'm imagining both of you had a sense of these things coming.
Well, so that day, in the morning of May 10th, the Emergency Operations Center was activated because there were increasing threats overnight. So from about midnight to 3 a.m. or so, we started to see an escalation in the threat that was going to be a potential in our community. So our Emergency Operations Center had partially activated, and Kevin and I had reported shortly after 7 o'clock with staff already there to help lead that response and recovery effort. We stayed activated for nearly 1 month's worth of time continuous, because what we do in Emergency Operations Center is we respond to the immediate life threats and then save lives wherever possible and coordinate those efforts. And then comes the recovery. So as we've talked about many different times, the recovery can often take months, if not years, to restore a community back to normal again. And many of those efforts are coordinated through the Emergency Operations Center by providing commodities like MREs, shelf-stable meals, and water to make sure that folks can recover. And then it's the longer-term business assistance, nonprofit assistance, and household repair and recovery.
So now that we have hurricane season coming, what's something that anyone listening can do to keep themselves a little safer?
Yeah, there are three main things that we would advocate. First off, and this doesn't cost anything, is to make a plan. Get together with your family and make sure you know what you're going to do if a hurricane does come to our part of the Big Bend this hurricane season. The next is have a way to receive the alerts. I know we've talked a lot about that, but having multiple ways to receive severe weather alerts and updates from Leon County, or if you're in a neighboring county, whichever county you live in, getting those emergency alerts, and having that disaster supply kit, all of the essential items you'll need if you're going to shelter in place in your home and your safe room, or if you have to take your stuff, maybe you live in a storm surge zone and you'll need to evacuate. You want to have all that consolidated. We recommend a 5-gallon bucket. Make it convenient, have all the items you need, and those are the three main things: the plan, the alerts, methods, and your disaster supply kit.
And those types of preparatory actions are one of the most significant ways to help you manage the anxiety as we again move into a hurricane season, which has a lot of levels of uncertainty for it. The initial forecasts are 17 storms. So it only takes one of those, obviously, as we know here in Leon County, to change how we live and what our future looks like. We've had 11 federally declared disasters here in Leon County since 2016. And when you take stock of that, some of those big names that jump out are Hermine and Irma and Michael. And then over the past year, again, we've had Debbie's and Helene's, and most significantly the May 10th tornadoes. And they stick in your head for a long, long time, and they make you somewhat anxious about what the hurricane season has to offer. One of the best ways to mitigate that is to have a plan with your friends and family in your neighborhood. Again, that network that is just adjacent to you, to what is it that you do and how do you prepare, and start those plans now in an effort to wrap your arms around it.
One of the things that people in our audience want to know is how things have recovered from last year, because yes, we can prepare from some of the damages, but we really need other people in the community to help us get to a place where we're whole again. So what do you know about how we have recovered from last year and maybe some of the things that you learned from such a unique event for the community.
So let me take one thing and then I'll pass it off to Kevin. So I just mentioned neighborhoods, and I want to underscore that again. The power of the neighborhoods and the neighbors that helped. One of the significant things we saw in the tornadoes, experiencing 3 tornadoes, 2 EF2s and 1 EF1 that scalpeled out nearly 2,000 structures worth of damage, is that the rest of the folks in our community could lend that assistance and help. What we had seen is the nonprofits and voluntary agencies making a significant effort in our community, removing more than 1,200 trees from properties. And so those were all the folks that showed up from Baptist this, veterans organizations that, to lean in and help and share that burden of recovery, which is just the same as it is in hurricanes, but most especially during the Maytown tornadoes. So again, the help of neighbors and the helps of voluntary agencies, and then the strength of nonprofit partners like 211 Big Bend to help connect folks to the myriad resources that are available that help you navigate that. So that case management is an important structure.
Yeah, I think I'll stand on that helping theme, and maybe a look behind the curtain a little bit at the county. And this is a lesson we've learned over the years: is that every county employee has a role. Obviously, this is what we do all the time with emergency communications and emergency management. But everybody, from librarians to environmental scientists, all of the positions within the county. You have people that do have critical roles, like our paramedics and our people with our public works department that clear the debris. But every employee has a role, and as we go through each of these emergencies, we discover all the different skill sets, and it helps us refine and place where all of these employees can help the best, because it's an entire response by Leon County to make sure our community on its worst day gets the best help they can get.
Yeah. Well, Matt and Kevin, I want to thank you for joining us for another episode of Unbothered.
Thank you.
You can hear these conversations on our podcast, Unbothered, available on all platforms. That's it for this week's Speaking Of Radio Hour. Got something to say? An idea for a show? Drop us a line at speakingof@wfsu.org. We want to hear from you. Speaking Of is produced with support from PRX and is made possible in part by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation. And it's brought to you by the fabulous, wonderful, yet overworked storytellers here at WFSU Public Media. Talk soon.